listening to a really good podcast today. It's a podcast called Philosophize This. I listen to it on Spotify. I recommend it if you like philosophy. But this particular episode is actually an old episode, but it was about tolerance. And again, great episode, worth listening to, and just talking about tolerance and intolerance and different philosophical views on it, and kind of following the logical thread of how it all plays out. So really interesting. But what I found myself thinking, and what I found most interesting about the episode and the experience I had listening to it, was it was messy. It didn't resolve itself. The guy who hosts the podcast and kind of does the podcast, he was making really thoughtful, well researched and well thought through points about what it means to be tolerant and what it means to be intolerant, and what it means to do that on either side to an extreme, and the flaws in it, right? A lot of people might think, well, tolerance is the game, right? That's what you want to be. But, to kind of illustrate his extreme point, what he said was, and I think it was based on another philosopher or scientist kind of theory, but if you practice extreme tolerance, right, in its purest form, if you're tolerant to anything, tolerance will die out, because inevitably if most people are tolerant, if that's what you try and practice, anybody who's intolerant, anybody who has a view where they don't like something, you have to be accepting of that, because that's what pure tolerance is. You're accepting of anything, and they will then ultimately win the day. They will destroy you because your tolerance will be beat out by their intolerance, and you will let it happen, because that's by definition what tolerance is. The flip side is a little bit more intuitive. If you're extremely intolerant, if you don't accept anything anybody else says, well, that's obviously a problem too, right? Everybody thinks their way is the right way. You start taking severe actions because you're intolerant of everything. And if anybody does something differently, you act out on that. And his point, what I found myself thinking as he was saying this was, I felt my mind trying to race and process, like, okay, I get that. Those are both logical. What's the resolution? What's the right way to be? If you can't be tolerant, if you can't be intolerant, what are you supposed to be? There has to be an answer. There has to be some bow you can put on this which says, okay, I feel okay now. This is what you should do. And there just wasn't. There just wasn't, right? At least that I could think of in that moment. And what's fascinating about that to me is the sensation the sensations that I went through, because the immediate kind of visceral reaction is there has to be something. There has to be an answer to this. There has to be something clean that I can process and wrap my mind around. And then when you start to realize there's not, it gets like physical discomfort that I felt. Like this, I do not like this feeling. I felt it in my stomach. I felt it in my head as I'm like, I gotta find something. I couldn't handle the fact that there wasn't a resolution, that there wasn't something that made this all make sense, and there wasn't a blueprint to follow. It's just so unbelievably unnatural for us, or at least for me, I should say, but I think it's true for many people. We can't handle that true ambiguity, right? On something that matters, something like this, which is an important topic. True, pure ambiguity, true, pure uncertainty to say, I don't know. I honestly don't know if there's an answer to this or what the answer might be. That is painful. That is a discomfort that strikes deep at the core of who I am. But then, what I'd like to believe, and I think it's true, I'm able now at least to step back from that and say, well, this is what it should be. This is real life, right? This is what it is. And although the visceral reaction and the physical reaction and the almost instinctual reaction is to be uncomfortable with this, to hate it, to not like it, to almost be sick by it, the evolved, the more sophisticated way of thinking is to embrace it and say, it's the truth. It's just the truth of what it is. This is real life. And the more you can swim in that, the more you can get comfortable in that uncertainty and that ambiguity, you're much more suited to handle life effectively. Because me finding some bow to put on it, me convincing myself and saying like, okay, there is an answer here. There is some way to do it. In that moment, I would feel better. That discomfort, that pain in my stomach, that racing of my mind to try and find an answer, that would all go away. And in the moment, in the short term, that would feel good. But the reality is in the long term, I don't have any answer here. Nothing that's real or true. So it's going to hurt me in the long term. I'm not going to be any better off. I'll be worse off, because I will think of the world as binary. I will think of the world as simple and clean when it's not. And that will come back to smack me in the face many times over. So it makes me think of the Immanuel Kant quote of, I believe it goes this way, but I usually butcher quotes. If the truth shall kill them, then let them die. That's kind of the sensation I was feeling in that moment. Like, this feels horrible. I don't think it's going to kill me, obviously, but this feels horrible. But if it feels horrible and it's the truth, well, then let it feel horrible, because that's what it is. And in a weird way, there's a comfort in that. There's a comfort in knowing this is the truth and just accept it. It's almost liberating to an extent. So, really interesting conversation. Maybe I'll do another video on this whole tolerance versus intolerance. And again, I would recommend listening to the podcast, Philosophize This. But for me, the big takeaway for today is just how horrible it feels to be uncertain on something that we want an answer to. But ultimately, I think we should seek the comfort in that and the liberation of saying, that's just what it is. That's just the truth of it.